I thought it was a little bit myopic of the Prime Minister in her speech to talk about the fact that, one, this isn't the kind of cultural practice that really fits in Australia, and two, that it was some kind of archaic cultural practice which belonged back in the days of Abraham, blah, 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 blah. A couple of problems with that. One, this debate doesn't just deal with Australia, where obviously the rate of circumcision is much lower because in general the kind of religious groups for which it is a cultural practice make up a smaller proportion of our society. But two, and more importantly, we think it's incredibly offensive to tell people for whom the days of Abraham are culturally important to them and part of their religious identity, to tell them that their ideas are archaic and outdated and don't belong in the kind of world the Prime Minister wanted to imagine existed today. So, I want to look at a couple of ideas in rebuttal, then I want to get onto my own material. First of all, this idea, briefly, on this assertion that there is no utility whatsoever associated with circumcision. Second of all, this idea about you couldn't possibly consent to this because you're a child and your parents can't make decisions for you ever, apparently. And finally, and very briefly, on this idea about your body parts being private. First of all, a lack of utility. No thank you. Alice just wanted to assert that there's absolutely no utility associated with circumcision. Like, why the hell would we lop off the end of a kid's penis for absolutely no reason whatsoever? There's no utility associated with it whatsoever. First of all, we would say, one, there's a very good reason why this practice exists, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it has some significant medical benefits that David's going to tell you more about within his deputy speech. Those are quite significant and are in fact in many ways attributed to the reason why the practice originated in the first place so long ago. But second of all, even if those benefits didn't exist, we would tell you the religious and cultural significance of this practice is enough to preserve it because of the importance to the individuals and the communities in which it takes place. Second of all, on this idea about consent, we would say we let parents make consent for children all the time. Otherwise, I don't know who the Prime Minister would be expecting to make these decisions for these kids. We let parents decide on all kinds of things which relate purely to religious reasons. We let parents choose to send their kids to religious schools. We let parents choose to homeschool their kids if they wish. But furthermore, when it comes to ideas about surgery in particular, we let parents make decisions about surgery for their kids all the time which don't necessarily have a tangible benefit and might cause some sort of short-term harm or short-term pain. Like, we let parents let their kids get their ears pierced. We let parents choose to have their kids get braces, which have absolutely no medical benefit, are a purely aesthetic surgery, but one that also can put the child through immense discomfort and immense inconvenience. We let parents choose on elective surgeries all the time, which involve the removal of body parts, like getting your tonsils removed, which is an outdated procedure, but parents can choose to still get their kids to undertake. Finally, and briefly on this idea about privacy, we would say the relationship between parent and child obviously means that to some extent that child's private parts aren't just something that's private and completely off limits. Like, if a child was diagnosed with some sort of disease involving their private parts, we'd say you'd probably ask the parents to, one, make a decision on that in the first place. But second of all, and more importantly, we think that in a community where circumcision is part of your cultural and religious identity, this isn't something which is just a matter of the individual, because when it comes to that individual fitting in within that community and feeling a sense of belonging and identity within that community and a sense of religious salvation, it no longer is a matter of privacy that the Prime Minister can just sweep under the rug. Okay, I want to look at two ideas. First of all, this idea about why religious freedom in this case absolutely trumps any kind of reasoning for a ban. And second of all, why, no thank you, respecting parental rights in this situation absolutely is paramount and absolutely is important. So let's take a look at why religious freedom is obviously important within this debate today. Madam Speaker, we would say that generally in our society we respect the rights of individuals to engage in practices which have important religious or cultural significance to them. We think circumcision absolutely fits the bill of that kind of practice in the world today. Yes, thank you.
Then why shouldn't kids, when they turn 18, be able to make that important cultural, religious decision for themselves?
Absolutely, Jess, and an excellent question. And I was going to get onto it later, but I'll get onto it now. Madam Speaker, the reason why it's important is because the religious benefits associated with circumcision for many people, such as those in the Jewish community, is that there are important benefits in terms of self-actualization and in terms of seeking salvation for that individual. The problem with waiting until an individual is 18 to make that decision is that individual, one, has to then go through the first 18 years of their life being unclean, essentially, being considered unclean, untouchable by their community, which removes the ability of that individual to engage with that religion in any meaningful way because they're being outcast from that community. But second of all, and more importantly, you're denying that individual 18 years of belonging to a community for which their future is going to be contingent and their future decision is contingent upon belonging to that community in the first place. I'm going to be talking more about parental choice and why it relates to that particular question in a second anyway, but for now, that response will suffice. Anyway, as I was saying, we recognise that there are important religious and cultural benefits associated with a practice like this. Why? Because as I previously said, because for the individual there are huge benefits in terms of seeking salvation. Why do we recognise those benefits as being important in society? Because the benefits to those individuals are huge, with absolutely no external harm upon anyone else in society. We think that, furthermore, the cultural significance of these kind of practice means that when it comes to a community like the Jewish community wanting to preserve their cultural identity, wanting to preserve a collective identity through something like circumcision, like the way that the Jewish people back in the ancient times within the Middle East distinguished themselves from other cultural groups was through the practice of circumcision. That's a very significant piece of their cultural identity. When you ban that, that is really harmful to that community because one, you are singling them out and targeting them in a way which is unfair and discriminatory, but two, you're denying them the ability to continue traditions which they hold very close to their hearts and hold deep significance within their cultural identity. We're not okay with banning that. We think that absolutely religious freedom trumps here. Why? Because we only ban religious practices when the harms from them are quite imminent, quite real, quite severe. That's why, for example, we would agree with the Prime Minister in not allowing female genital mutilation, because that is a practice which is incredibly damaging, which is incredibly permanent, and most importantly, absolutely harms that individual. No, thank you. We would say that in the kind of clinical sense in which a circumcision undertakes, the harms and the pain to the child are, to be frank, incredibly temporary and incredibly minimal. And the benefits are quite long-lasting in a number of ways, which David is going to elaborate on within his speech. So, parental rights, why are they important? We give parents a right to make decisions for kids all the time within society for a very good reason. One, because we recognise that parents have the right to choose the cultural and religious circumstances of the upbringing of their child, because as parents who undertake that upbringing, it absolutely is their right that they earn through doing so. But second of all, we would say that they are the ones who understand the child's best needs and best interests when it comes to raising that child within that cultural context that they're raising them in. Finally, we think the relationship between the parent and the child is important and something that absolutely should be preserved. Why on earth would we, what on earth is the consequence of banning parents from allowing to choose such a procedure from taking place? One, you damage the relationship between the parent and those child, because those parents have to raise their children for the first 18 years of their life being considered culturally and religiously unclean and an outsider. That's incredibly damaging to that relationship. But second of all, you absolutely undermine the ability for that child to engage within the community within which they're being raised. That absolutely damages that child's upbringing, it damages their future, and it damages their ability to self-actualize and seek salvation we are very proud to oppose.